Finance and Economics Discussion Series Divisions of Research and Statistics and Monetary Affairs. Federal Reserve Board, Washington, D.C. Credit where none is due. Authorized User Account Status and Piggybacking Credit. Robert B. Avery, Kenneth P. Brevoort, and Glenn B. Canner. 2010-23. Note: Staff working papers in the Finance and Economics Discussion Series (FEDS) are preliminary material circulated to stimulate discussion and critical comment. The analysis and conclusions set forth are those of the authors and do not indicate concurrence by other members of the research staff or the Board of Governors. References in publications to the Finance and Economics Discussion Series other than acknowledgement should be cleared with the authors to protect the tentative character of these papers. Credit where none is due. Authorized User Account Status and Piggybacking Credit. Robert B. Avery, Kenneth P. Brevoort, Glenn B. Canner. March 5, 2010. Abstract: An authorized user is a person who is permitted by a revolving account holder to use an account without being legally liable for any charges incurred. The Federal Reserve's Regulation B, which implements the 1974 Equal Credit Opportunity Act, requires that information on spousal authorized user accounts be reported to the credit bureaus and considered when lenders evaluate credit history. Since creditors generally furnish to the credit bureaus information on all authorized user accounts, without indicating which are spouses and which are not, credit scoring modelers cannot distinguish spousal from non-spousal authorized user accounts. This effectively requires that all authorized user accounts receive similar treatment. Consequently, becoming an authorized user on an old account with a good payment history may improve an individual's credit score, potentially increasing access to credit or reducing borrowing costs. As a result, the practice of piggybacking credit has developed. In a piggybacking arrangement, an individual pays a fee to be added as an authorized user on an account to rent the account's credit history. This paper provides the first comprehensive look at authorized user accounts in individual credit records and how their importance differs across demographic groups. Our analysis suggests that piggybacking credit can materially improve credit scores, particularly for individuals with thin or short credit histories. We also evaluate the effect that eliminating authorized user accounts from credit scoring models would have on individual credit scores. Our results suggest that removing this information has relatively little effect on credit scores, but may reduce model predictiveness. Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, Washington, D.C. Email addresses: ravery@frb.gov, kenneth.p.brevoort@frb.gov, and gcanner@frb.gov. The opinions expressed in this paper are those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Federal Reserve Board or its staff. We thank Ezra Becker, Leonard Channon, Jane Gell, Catherine Henderson, Robin Prager, David Stein, and Chet Wiermanski for helpful comments, Cheryl Cooper for research assistance, and Rick McKinney for help assembling a history of Regulation B. Any remaining errors are our own. Ken Brevoort also thanks the Credit Research Center and Business School at the University of Edinburgh for their hospitality while working on this paper. 1. Introduction: Revolving account holders, such as credit card users, may designate other individuals as authorized users on their accounts. An authorized user is a person who is permitted to use an account without being legally liable for any charges incurred. When an authorized user on an account is the spouse of an account holder, the Federal Reserve Board's Regulation B, which implements the 1974 Equal Credit Opportunity Act (ECOA), imposes two important requirements on creditors. First, when providing information to the credit bureaus, creditors are required to furnish information for the authorized user as well as for the account holders. Second, when using credit history to assess the creditworthiness of applicants, creditors are required to consider, when available, the history of accounts held by the applicant's spouse on which the applicant is an authorized user, as well as those accounts that are jointly held. 1. These requirements have been in place since Reg. B's inception in 1975. In promulgating these provisions of Reg. B, the Federal Reserve Board pointed to complaints received from women who were unable to obtain credit because information on accounts jointly held with their husbands was reported to the credit bureaus in the husband's name alone. Additionally, the board took the view that, since some state laws hold one spouse liable for debts incurred by the other, a spouse should have the benefit or burden of the credit history of their spouse's accounts that they were authorized to use. Further motivation was provided by the significant role that spousal authorized users were found to play in the maintenance of an account, such that the payment history on an account was often as much the product of the user's contribution as that of the obliger. 2. In addition to helping spousal authorized users build an independent credit history, granting authorized user status has been used to help young individuals learn to manage credit and build a credit history. This is possible because creditors generally have followed a practice of furnishing to credit bureaus information about all authorized users, whether or not the authorized user is a spouse, without indicating which authorized users are spouses and which are not. This practice does not violate Reg. B. As a result, the information maintained in credit bureau records generally does not distinguish spousal from non-spousal authorized users. This prevents credit scoring modelers and 1 Section 202.6b of Regulation B 12 CFR 202.6b. 2A discussion of the motivation behind the provisions of Regulation B can be found in the accompanying Notice of Final Rulemaking in 40 Federal Register 205, the 22nd of October 1975, pp. 49298-49310. 2. Creditors that use credit reports from distinguishing spousal from non-spousal authorized user accounts. Since spousal authorized user trade lines must be considered in evaluating creditworthiness to comply with the requirements of Reg. B, but may not be identifiable in an applicant's credit record, creditors may have to consider all authorized user accounts on an individual's credit record, regardless of whether they reflect a spousal relationship to an account holder. For this reason, credit history scores, such as the FICO score, 3 have traditionally accorded authorized user accounts equal weight to the other accounts on an individual's credit record. The practices described above have the unintended consequence of creating the opportunity for piggybacking credit to emerge. Piggybacking occurs when an individual becomes an authorized user on an account for the sole purpose of improving that person's credit history. Because of the manner in which authorized user information is reported to the credit bureaus, the full credit history of an account is reflected on the credit records of both an account holder and an authorized user, regardless of when the authorized user was added to the account. Consequently, a person's credit report may reflect several years of account history as soon as that person becomes an authorized user. If the account has desirable characteristics such as a low utilization rate or a good payment history, this may improve the authorized user's credit risk profile and credit scores. The result may be enhanced access to credit and reduced borrowing costs. Beginning in 2007, companies began to emerge to help borrowers with poor credit histories piggyback on the good credit history of others. Individuals pay a fee to these companies to locate an account holder who is willing to add this person to their account in exchange for a portion of the fee. For the person added to the account as an authorized user in name only, as the individual receives neither the account number nor an access device such as a credit card and consequently cannot use the account for purchases. 5 By piggybacking on someone else's account history, however, an authorized user may be able to improve their credit score in advance of a credit application. 3 FICO scores are a trademark of Fair Isaac Corporation. For more information on the FICO score, refer to http://www.myfico.com. 4 Industry sources indicate that individuals pay between $1,000 and $2,000 to obtain an authorized user account and that the individual renting out an account can earn about $200 per month. Refer to Harney 2007, Ueel 2007, and Burney 2007. 5 This approach is not without risks to the account holder. If the person added as an authorized user is able to obtain an access device directly from the lender, then they are legally permitted to run up charges on the account. 3. Potentially resulting in lower borrowing costs or an ability to qualify for credit that otherwise would not be extended. The practice of piggybacking credit has raised concerns that the credit scores of people with authorized user accounts may not accurately reflect their creditworthiness. For example, a study by Fitch Ratings Pendley, Costello, and Kelsch, 2007, of mortgage defaults points to the presence of authorized user accounts on the credit records of high FICO borrowers who defaulted on their loans as evidence of poor underwriting practice by the lender. In response to concerns about the role of authorized user accounts in credit scores, Fair Isaac, which has traditionally treated authorized users and account holders identically, has revised the FICO credit scoring model to place less weight on those accounts on which an individual is an authorized user. Despite these concerns, very little is known about the role played by authorized user accounts in credit history files and, to date, the Federal Trade Commission has not taken action against companies that offer piggybacking arrangements. This study examines the role of authorized user accounts in credit scoring, with particular focus on the role of authorized user accounts in the credit records of married women, whose treatment was a central motivating factor in the requirements of Reg. B. And consequences of piggybacking credit. We rely on a unique, nationally representative sample of credit records and a credit scoring model, the FRB base model, constructed by staff of the Federal Reserve Board as part of a study of credit scoring mandated by Congress. Our analysis does three things. First, we provide a detailed profile of authorized users examining how the use of authorized user status differs across race or ethnicity, age, sex, and marital status in terms of its prevalence and importance to an individual's credit record. Using the FRB base model, we examine the contributions that authorized user accounts make to the credit scores of individuals in our sample. Particular focus is placed on the effect of authorized user accounts on the credit scores of married individuals. Second, we evaluate the size of the potential gains an individual can achieve as a result of piggybacking credit. Using the FRB base model, we simulate the effect on an individual's credit score of being added as an authorized user to an established account with a good payment history. This allows us to identify the population whose scores are most likely to be affected by purchasing authorized user status and to estimate the potential harm that results from this practice. Our analysis reveals that these benefits are potentially quite large, particularly for people with thin or short credit histories, suggesting that the practice of piggybacking credit, in some cases, may 4. Artificially enhance an individual's access to credit without improving the individual's true creditworthiness. Finally, we examine how credit scores change when authorized user accounts are not used in the construction and application of credit scoring models. This is done by re-estimating the FRB base model, using credit characteristics that exclude information from authorized user accounts, and generating scores based on this new model. The results of this analysis suggest there would be little impact on credit scores if a credit scoring model did not incorporate information on authorized user accounts. Nevertheless, the elimination of authorized user accounts slightly reduces the predictiveness of the FRB base model. The remainder of the study documents the details of our analysis. The next section outlines the data used in this study and provides additional information on the development of the FRB base model. In the following section, we profile authorized user accounts and describe how FRB base scores are affected by the presence of this account information. In the two subsequent sections, we then describe how credit scores and model predictiveness are altered by the exclusion of authorized user trades and simulate the potential impact of piggybacking credit on individual credit scores. The final section summarizes our findings and discusses the public policy implications. The data and FRB base model. This study uses a large, nationally representative sample of individual credit records that has been augmented with personal demographic information on each individual. This dataset was assembled by staff of the Federal Reserve Board for use in its report to Congress on credit scoring and its effects on the availability and affordability of credit. Board of Governors, 2007, and, as of this writing, is the only nationally representative dataset of its kind, since credit records do not include any personal demographic information, other than age, which is frequently missing. Point 6. The following briefly outlines the contents of this dataset. Point 7. The dataset contains a nationally representative random sample of approximately 300,000 credit records from TransUnion, LLC, as of June 30, 2003 and updated as of December 31, 2004. These records include information on each individual's credit accounts or trade lines collection. 6. This study was requested by Congress in Section 215 of the Fair and Accurate Credit Transaction Act, Public Law 108-159, enacted December 4, 2003. The study is available at http://www.federalreserve.gov/pub/reports_other.htm. 7. For more detail on the contents of this database, see Board of Governors 2007 or Avery, Brevoort, and Canner 2009. 5. Accounts, monetary-related public records, and a complete record of inquiries made by creditors and others legally entitled to the information. Point 8. These data indicate whether a person individually holds, jointly holds, or is an authorized user on each of the trade lines in her credit record. The dataset also includes two commercially available credit scores, the Trans Risk Account Management Score (Trans Risk Score) and the Vantage Score. Point 9. The information provided by TransUnion included a file of 312 pre-calculated variables, referred to as credit characteristics. These credit characteristics are summary measures of each credit record, for example, the age of an individual's oldest account, or the total number of serious delinquencies, and were created by TransUnion to facilitate the development of credit scoring models for themselves and for their customers. A subset of these credit characteristics comprise the inputs into the FRB base model. As noted, the only personal demographic information included in credit records is date of birth, though this information was missing in about 1/3 of the credit records. However, credit records contain additional types of information such as name, social security number, and current and previous addresses that were used to obtain demographic information on each individual from the U.S. Social Security Administration (SSA) and from one of the nation's leading demographic information companies. Point 10. The SSA collects demographic information when individuals apply for a Social Security card. Point 11. With the names and Social Security numbers provided by TransUnion, the SSA provided information on each individual including their citizenship, the date they filed for a Social Security card, their place of birth, state or country, race or ethnic description, sex, and date of birth. An 8A detailed assessment of the contents of credit records is provided by Avery, et al. 2003. 9. Approximately 23% of the sample population was unscorable by at least one of the credit scoring models, the vast majority of whom were scorable by neither. Generally, an individual credit record is unscorable when it does not contain a sufficient amount of recent account activity. 10. The matches involved a double-blind process between TransUnion and the other data providers so that the integrity and privacy of each party's records were maintained. No individually identifying information was provided to the Federal Reserve Board, no credit history information was received by the SSA or demographic company, and no demographic information was provided to TransUnion. The demographic information company has elected to remain anonymous. 11. The application form for a Social Security card is SS5052006. This form can be viewed online at http://www.ssa.gov/online/ss-5.html. 6. Applicant for a Social Security card is required to supply all of this demographic information as part of their application, with the exception of race or ethnicity, which is requested by not required. Point 12. Information on each individual's marital status was provided by the demographic information company. The company culls this information from thousands of public and private data sources and supplies it to creditors and other interested entities for use in marketing and solicitation activities. As mentioned earlier, this study also makes use of the FRB base model, a credit history score developed by staff of the Federal Reserve. This credit scoring model was constructed using a model building algorithm that was designed to mimic the process used by industry model builders. The FRB base model was estimated using the same sample of credit records used in this study. The FRB base model is comprised of 3 different scorecards. Individuals with 2 or fewer trade lines in their credit records are scored on the thin scorecard. People with more than 2 trade lines are placed on the dirty scorecard if they meet any of the following 3 conditions. 1. They have been 90 or more days past due on an account. 2. They have a monetary-related public record on their file, such as bankruptcy or garnishment. Or 3. They have collection accounts totaling more than $50. Other individuals are placed on the clean scorecard. A separate equation, with a separate selection of right-hand side credit characteristics, is used for each of these scorecards. The model for each scorecard is designed to predict whether a person will have bad or good performance, measured as each individual's worst performance on a new or existing account during an 18-month performance window of July 2003 through December 2004. 13 accounts that were 90 or more days past due exhibit bad performance, and accounts that were not 30 or more days past due, but that have evidence of payments having been made, had good performance. Other accounts had indeterminate performance. An individual's performance is bad if 1 or more of his accounts had bad performance during the performance period. Conversely, an individual's performance was good if he had good performance on at least 1 account without any accounts with bad or indeterminate performance. Otherwise, an individual's 12. For further discussion about the SSA data and how they were matched to the credit records, see Board of Governors 2007. 13 new accounts are those that were opened during the first 6 months of the 18-month performance period. Existing accounts were those that were open as of June 2003 with no evidence of delinquency. This is a common definition of credit performance used by credit scoring model builders. 7. Performance is classified as indeterminate. The dependent variable in these estimations is a dichotomous indicator variable that takes on a value of 1 for good performance and 0 for bad performance. Individuals who have indeterminate performance are excluded from the estimation of the model, but are used in evaluating the model's effectiveness. A separate linear probability model was estimated for each of the 3 scorecards. 1. The credit characteristics that comprised each model were selected using a forward stepwise selection process using the 312 credit characteristics supplied by TransUnion. Each credit characteristic entered the model as a step function or series of credit attributes, where the breakpoints of the individual steps were selected using statistical criteria used by industry model builders. Characteristics were selected until the marginal improvement in the divergence statistic from the addition of another characteristic fell below a specified threshold. This process was designed to mimic the process used by industry model builders. For example, each credit characteristic enters the model as a step function and the coefficients assigned to the steps of a characteristic, or the credit attributes, were constrained to be monotonic. A detailed discussion of the model building process is provided by Board of Governors 2007.15. The fitted values from these estimated equations are then normalized to a rank order scale. The normalization is constructed such that an individual's score represents the percentile of the distribution into which that score falls. In other words, 25% of the individuals in the sample had a score of 25 or less. These normalized scores range between 0 and 100.16 using 2 commercially available credit scores, the Trans Risk Account Management Score from TransUnion and the Vantage Score, that had been normalized to an identical rank order scale, Board of Governors 2007 finds that the credit score patterns across demographic groups were very similar. 14. The use of a linear probability model in the FRB base model was motivated by concerns about the additional computational burden of estimating a probit or logit model. Avery, Brevoort, and Kanner 2009 use the same model building process as the FRB base model but replace the linear probability model with a logit and find almost identical results to Board of Governors 2007. 15. In some ways the process deviated from that used by industry model builders. Most importantly, this process was entirely algorithmic, whereas commercial model building generally involves greater use of art, e.g., modeler experience and intuition. Additionally, the FRB base model was constructed using a linear probability model, rather than the more commonly used logit model. Avery, Brevoort, and Kanner 2009 conduct a similar analysis to that of Board of Governors 2007 using a logit model and find that the results are qualitatively identical. 16. As a frame of reference, a single point in the FRB base model is roughly equivalent to 5 points on a FICO or VantageScore scale. 8. Across the 3 credit scoring models. This suggests that the FRB base model closely approximates score differences across demographic groups observed in commercially available models. Profile of authorized user accounts. This analysis focuses on the treatment of authorized user trade lines in credit scoring models and consequently, we focus on the scorable population as defined by the FRB base model. In general, an individual credit record is considered to be unscorable when it lacks sufficient information, such as information on at least one trade line, or when there is no evidence of recent account activity. 17 Excluding the unscorable population, for whom the treatment of authorized user trade lines in a credit scoring model is largely irrelevant, leaves a scorable population of 232,467 credit records, all of which have at least one non-authorized user trade line. Authorized user accounts are not rare. As shown in Table 1, over 1/3 of the scorable population had one or more authorized user trade lines. Only a small fraction, 1.3%. However, had more authorized user trade lines than non-authorized user trade lines, that is, trade lines on which the individual is an individual or joint account holder. 0.18 Across racial or ethnic groups, authorized user status was found more frequently among non-Hispanic whites than other groups, particularly blacks, only 19.9% of whom had authorized user accounts on their credit records. Authorized user accounts are also observed more frequently for married individuals than 17. The technical definition of a scorable credit record for the FRB base model is that the record should have had both a trans risk score and a VantageScore. This definition was largely equivalent to requiring each individual be scorable under the trans risk scoring model, as only 39 out of 301,536 records had a VantageScore but no trans risk score. Approximately 23% of the sample population was unscorable by at least one of the credit scoring models. Generally, an individual credit record is unscorable when it does not contain a sufficient amount of recent account activity. For a detailed examination of the contents of the unscorable credit records, see Board of Governors 2007. 18. One reason this number is so small is that a credit record needs at least one non-authorized user trade line to be scorable. Consequently, credit records with only authorized user trade lines are excluded from the scorable sample. The term, non-authorized user trade line, in this paper means that the individual whose credit record is being examined is not an authorized user on the account. This does not imply that there are no authorized users on that account. For example, if an account has a single account holder and an authorized user, that account information, which is reported on the credit records of both individuals, is considered an authorized user account for the authorized user and as a non-authorized user account for the account holder.